So basically, we're going to be talking about chapter one, major themes of biology, and these notes are actually based off of the 11th edition. I actually have the hardcover, but I also have the PDF as well. And so these notes are based off the 11th edition. They shouldn't really be different from like ninth, 8th, 10th, they shouldn't be that different. But yeah, we're going to be covering the overview of chapter one. Now, as I explain these what's it called, these terminologies, I'm only going to explain them very like broadly and very vaguely. I'm not going to go in anything specific because obviously Campbell's biology has have later chapters to explain all those specifics, but chapter one is really just for an overview. So I want you to get an overview of chapter one so that when we talk about more specific stuff in the future, you can connect to the vague and broader term. So, terminologies. All right, so let's start off with emergent properties. I also answered the tester understanding questions as well, so I'll go through those questions as well. So, let's go. Chapter 1, Biology Walkthrough. It's official. All right, okay, enough talking. So, emergent properties are properties that emerge in correlation to increased complexity. So, basically, imagine we start off with a molecule and we increase the complexity to something as such as an organelle, right? An organelle is obviously more complex than a um, molecule, right? And so basically, as we do this, new properties are forming, right? So basically, all you need to know is the name is very suggestive. All you need to know is that properties emerge in correlation to the increased complexity, right? Such as, new properties from a molecule to an organelle, right? Okay, so molecules are two or more atoms chemically bonded together. Okay, so organelles are the constituents of cells that serve for a function such as the nucleus serves to contain genetic information. So basically, organelles are the constituents of cells that help the cell function. So the nucleus helps contain a lot of genetic information into a pretty small nucleus, if you ask me, considering how much genetic information you can fit. And then other organelles are like mitochondria, which is used to produce ATP, ribosomes, which are used in transcription and translation. They help protein synthesis, and just a lot of other organelles, right? Now let's move on. Cells are the fundamental unit of life, right? So basically, the cells help serve for specific functions, so such as antibodies. So like antibodies are cells that fight off infection. So the cells are the fundamental units of life, and basically all living things have cells. That's how we define if something's living. If it has a cell, then it's living. Even if it has one cell, it's living. If it has trillions of cells like us, then it's living. As just long as it has a cell. So then a tissue is a group of two or more cells working together for a specialized function. So such as the nervous tissue, right? The nervous tissue is used to coordinate bodily movements, right? That's pretty deducible. And then organs are a group of two or more tissues working together for a specialized function, such as the heart. The heart is used to pump blood. Remember, just going very basic overview. And then the organ system, as you can probably deduce, is a group of two or more organs working in unity for specialized function, such as the nervous system, right? The nervous system is a network of nerve cells and fibers that transmit nerve impulses between the parts of the body. And then an organism is basically all these lower complexities combined to make something living. So a living creature, more scientifically known, is an organism. So a species is a group of organisms that can reproduce with each other to make a fertile offspring. So essentially, if an organism can essentially reproduce with another organism, then they're considered their own species. So a population is a group of species that live in a particular area. Now, I probably should put a group of one species. In fact, let me fix that. It's actually a group of one species because, yeah, so it's only one species. However, a community is a vast array of populations that live in a particular area. So basically, a community is multiple different populations. So a population only takes into account one species, but a community takes into account of multiple populations or multiple species that live in a particular area. Now, ecosystems are essentially communities that interact with its non-biotic factors such as wind, water, and soil. Pretty simple. And then the biosphere, as you can probably deduce, is all life on Earth and all places on Earth that contain life. Now, as you noticed, I think you probably did, we went from less complex to more complex, right? Less complex. Oh, it's hard to less complex to more complex, obviously, right? Now, reductionism is essentially very suggestive. The name is suggestive. It's essentially when it's a method of study that takes one component of that study into consideration. So, for example, if we're studying about memory and basically reductionism is like could be like, oh, let's only focus on the hippocampus, right? So essentially takes only one constituent of of that like study into consideration. And this method can be useful, but it has limitations because sometimes in order to understand something, we must understand how it interacts with its other constituents and components, right? So reductionism goes really specific and only takes one component into consideration. Now, systems biology is essentially the opposite. It takes multiple components and constituents into consideration. So pretty simple. And then the correlation of structure and function is pretty simple as well. So basically, if you can deduce something's function, you can also deduce its structure. So you can deduce something's function if you know its structure, vice versa. So then prokaryotic cells are essentially cells that lack membrane-bound organelles, such as the mitochondria and the nucleus. And they're just generally less complex than eukaryotic cells, and there are obviously smaller than eukaryotic cells. And all prokaryotic cells are unicellular. That's important to know. Unicellular, uni means one, cellular, so one cell, basically, right? And then eukaryotic cells are cells that contain membrane-bound organelles, such as the nucleus or the mitochondria. And essentially, they can be unicellular or multicellular. In fact, I should have wrote that down, but these are my notes, so I didn't need that much information for this chapter. So, DNA is essentially deoxyribonucleic acid, right? So, a nucleic acid is essentially consisted of nucleotides that contain genetic information, and the four nucleotides in DNA are adenine, guanine, tyrosine, and thymine. And yeah, so then genes are portions of chromosomes that help encode proteins and specific traits such as eye color. So basically, they're on the locus of chromosomes, and they help encode proteins for specific functions. Now, gene expression is when if we take a gene or we take genetic information and we convert this gene or genetic information into a cellular product such as proteins. So, for example, in central dogma, we start off with DNA, obviously replicated DNA, and then we go to mRNA, and then we go to proteins. I mean, obviously, it's more complex, but we're only here for an overview, so let's not go that deep. But that's basically an example of gene expression. So genomics. So genomics is pretty suggestive, just the studies of a species genome. And then bioinformatics is basically the study of computational tools like computers, which like store and analyze large sets of biological data. So pretty suggestive as well. So producers are organisms that make their own food. In fact, make their own food. Yeah, okay. I thought I made a typo. So basically, organisms that make their own food through a process called photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is the process in which the sun's radiation or the sunlight is converted to chemical energy for the plant, and then essentially the chemical energy is then stored as food or sugar, thus giving energy to the plant. And actually, as we move on to chapters, we'll be actually talking about photosynthesis in a much more specific way as we just talked about it. We're just only here for the overview. So then consumers are organisms that feed off other organisms for energy. Pretty simple. So we are consumers, obviously. I mean, I hope we are consumers because how else are we going to get our food? Okay, so feedback regulation is basically the effect of the output process on an initial stimuli. So basically, negative feedback, as you can probably deduce, is when the output reduces the initial stimuli. And most processes in your body are actually negative feedback. So most loop. And so, for example, I'll use two examples. I should have put like sweating as an example. That's the most one of the most common one. But I'll start off with the one that I typed up. So an example like this, and this is the example that they use in the textbook. But an example is like, let's say you eat food, right? When you eat food, let's say your blood sugar level rises. So as a result, that your pancreas secrete insulin, right? Insulin is a hormone that helps regulate blood sugar levels. So essentially, as you eat a meal, your blood sugar level rises, let's assume, and your pancreas secrete insulin. And so this insulin will bind to body cells and store itself into liver cells. And so as a result, since this insulin is already like somewhere else, the blood sugar level decreases. Therefore, we've reduced the stimulation of insulin. So the initial stimuli was the trigger of blood sugar levels rising, or or basically the secretion or production of insulin. That was the initial stimuli, the production of insulin from eating the meal. And now, basically, as we like produce insulin, we've actually decreased the stimulation of insulin because the insulin binds to body cells and stores themselves into liver cells. And then another example is sweating, right? When you're super hot, like if you're on a beach and you're sweating as crazy, then your body's gonna sweat. So then when your body sweats, you're essentially cooling yourself off. So you're essentially reducing the initial stimuli. Then the stimuli was essentially you were hot, and now the sweating makes you cool. So you're essentially reducing it. So you're kind of doing the opposite of the stimuli. So positive feedback is basically when the output process speeds up or increases the initial stimuli. So as you can probably deduce, it's basically when the output essentially um, increases the initial stimuli. So, for example, clotting is a very, I think they use clotting in this textbook. Basically, clotting is like basically when you have like a blood vessel injury and then platelets come to help heal or clot the blood. And so basically, when these platelets do this, more platelets, the platelets, I mean, attract more platelets due to chemical composition, thus increasing the initial stimuli. Right, the initial stimuli was the formation of platelets, and now the formation of platelets help bring more platelets given its chemical composition. So we've actually increased it in the initial stimuli. Note that there are more negative feedback processes than positive. There's still a lot of positive, but there's just a lot more negative. So evolution. Evolution is the process in which past traits are modified into organisms over a long period of time to help diversify them. That was worded really badly. My bad. I'm just bad at taking notes at school. So basically, evolution is a very big concept. In fact, it shapes biology today. Evolution explains so many things, but I could sit here and talk about evolution all I wanted. In fact, if you create like probably like a 2 hour lecture on it, maybe 1 hour, I don't know. But what you need to know for the overview is basically it's a process in which you modify organisms' traits. Not you modify, but the natural process in which modification of organisms' traits modify themselves to a long period of time. So, like basically, you know what evolution is, right? Modification to traits over a long period of time. Not much to say since we're going over a simple overview. Well, I almost lost my word there, sleeping off. So, natural selection is basically the process in which the environment or nature chooses the traits best suitable for the environment. Um, so, such as fish need gills. Some fish, right? Fish need gills in order to breathe in water. So essentially, they probably adapted to get gills, and so this trait helps them, uh, survive. Just as in hummingbirds can actually stay in the air, and they can I think they can rotate their wings backwards in reverse, and this helps them like stay in the air and like start feeding off of some random stuff. I'm not gonna ornithology. Okay, so yeah, and then another way to think about this is basically descent with modification. And Charles Darwin, the father of evolution, one of the fathers of biology, made this thesis. Not surprising. Okay, so bacteria and archaea are basically domains of prokaryotes, And so basically, the main difference is that archaea live in extreme environments such as hot springs. Now, eukarya are essentially domains of eukaryotes, and there are four kingdoms. There are four kingdoms: plantae, fungi, animalia, and protista. And we are obviously animalia. So plantae contains organisms that can produce their own food through photosynthesis. Pretty simple. Fungi are organisms that can feed off from the outside, such as mushrooms. And then animalia, we are obviously in this kingdom, are basically organisms that can feed off from other organisms for energy. And protistas are actually little less specific. In fact, they're basically just unicellular or mostly unicellular organisms that live in bodies of water. So basically, there are no common morphology between them. So basically, there's still an area of study. So some protists are actually closely related to the other kingdoms than they are related to other protists. So it's still there's not really common morphology, but just know that if it's not eukarya, plantae, or fungi, then it's a protist. So don't worry about protists too much. Just know that they live in some of them live in like bodies of water, such as like pond water or something like that. So scientific inquiry. This is like the boring part in chapter one. A question raised by natural phenomena. There's not much I can really say. And then inductive reasoning based off of data that leads to a conclusion. Not much I can say from there. And then deductive reasoning that leads to predictions to test a possible hypothesis. Not much. And then essentially, controlled experiment are experiments that contain experimental and control groups. So essentially, control groups are used to cancel out excess factors. So I think in chapter one, they talked about mice, and basically the controlled experiment was essentially they spray painted mice to camouflage in their own habitat, and then the control group they used were non-camouflaged mice, and they wanted to test if the camouflage mice survive more than the non-camouflage mice, and it's pretty obvious. And they actually found out that obviously the camouflage mice survived more, but the control group was the non-camouflage mice because it was used to cancel out excess factors. The reason why they still had non-camouflage mice was to like take out factors like temperature or like other factors or other reasons why predators looked for these organisms or these prey. And then the experimental group was essentially the camouflaged mice. So yeah, I should have typed that up, but yeah, that's what I remember. And these are questions. So all organisms on your own campus make up a community. Pretty simple. You can test your understanding. And then systems biology is understand the behavior of the entire biological system among its components. So C, which of the following best demonstrates the unity among organisms? Uh, Probably C, right? The structure and function of DNA. In fact, if you read the chapter one, we have an almost identical genetic code. Almost, it's the almost universal code. Almost in some species, the genetic code differs. So it's obviously C. Natural selection. That's it. You can eliminate descendant modification and natural selection because they're the same thing. And then emergent properties that tells us nothing. And then controlled experiment is one that B test experimental and control groups in parallel. Yeah, just like we defined earlier. Which of the following statements best distinguishes a hypothesis from theories in science? So hypotheses can usually be relatively narrow in scope. Theories, yeah. So it's C. Hypotheses are obviously narrow in scope, and theories are broad. So which of the following is an example of quantitative data? The answer is temperature decreased from 20 degrees Celsius to 15, obviously. Which sentence best describes the logic of scientific inquiry? Yeah, D. If my hypothesis is correct, I can expect certain test results. This is really just if you read chapter one, you should be fine. And I actually skipped chapter eight. Yeah, I skipped it. I was like, bro, I'm not gonna draw it, bro. I'm too lazy. I mean, I probably could, but I was typing up my notes, so like, I don't really want to do anything for that. I mean, I guess I could have drawn it and like uploaded it, but nah, that's not really that important. Nine is a so basically you can read nine. To just read up nine. You can kind of zoom in on it. I could have found a better picture. Alright, actually, so basically, for nine, the explanation I put is that this is most likely true because even though evolution has made some major modifications to organisms, there still remains unity. So basically, I think that 1,000 genes would probably contain vital information necessary for the organisms to live. So basically, the 1,000 genes are probably like genes that you must have in order to live. All right, what's it? 10. What was 10? Oh yeah, Time was just like make another hypothesis and like claim. So I said if we camouflage all the mice, then the predators of the mouse will decrease in population. Answers may vary. No need to answer. 11 was like search up what? Like you don't really need to search that up. Like I guess if you want to, but I'm kind of like on like I'm trying to finish this by specific date. So this textbook. So I don't really want to waste my time doing stuff like that. And all organisms have originated from one cell. Oh yeah, for number 12, it wanted me to write an essay. I'm like, I'm not writing an essay, but yeah, really basic. Number 13, this is the answer. And yeah, I think these were like pretty easy. You can just read them yourself and do them yourself. Yeah, but yeah, that was a long overview, and that's chapter 1.